Yo, I just wanted to ask ChatGPT a question, see what old chat thought about. Like, what's the biggest factor between the black and white racial wealth gap in America right now? So I asked Chat, what is the greatest contributing factor to the difference in the racial wealth gap between white Americans and African Americans? And here's what Chat said. There is no single factor that economists or historians identify as the greatest contributor. However, the strongest consensus is that differences in inherited wealth and home ownership rooted in historical discrimination and compounded over generations are the largest contributors to today's black and white wealth gap in the United States. Here's why that factor stands out. Wealth is cumulative across generations. Wealth is different from income. Income is what you earn each year. Wealth includes savings, investments, home equity, businesses, and inheritances. Families that accumulated essays decades ago often pass them down to their children through inheritances, gifts for college, down payments, or business ownership. Historical barriers limited wealth accumulation for many black Americans. Major examples include enslavement, which prevented wealth accumulation for generations. So we're talking 200 plus years right there. Post Civil War discrimination, including sharecropping and exclusion from many economic opportunities. Segregation and discriminatory lending practices, often called redlining, which limited home purchases and appreciations in many neighborhoods. That redlining was vicious. Exclusion from the New Deal and post-war benefits for many black workers, depending on occupation and local implementation. Also, the GI Bill was wrapped in that. That was a whole thing with the GI Bill. Home ownership has been especially important for most African American families. No, I'm sorry. For most American families, a home is the largest asset they own. That's American families, not just African Americans. White families generally entered home ownership earlier and benefited from decades of rising home values, which we could see why from the previous excerpts earlier. We can see why they got into home ownership early. Because home equity can be passed to the next generation or used to finance educational businesses, differences in home ownership have long lasting effects. Researchers estimate that inheritances and inter vivos, living transfers, account for a substantial share of the racial wealth gap through estimates varying. Though estimates vary depending on the methods used. So inter-wealth transfers, I'm sure y'all heard of that before. Wealth transfers, y'all heard that term going around before. Other important contributing factors. White intergenerational wealth is often considered the largest factor. Several others also play significant roles. Income differences. Higher average earnings make it easier to save and invest. Differences in saving rates. Even at similar incomes, some studies find differences in saving behavior, though these are often influenced by wealth, family obligations, and access to financial products. Business ownership. White households are more likely to own businesses, which can generate significant wealth, which we know why from earlier, from a few excerpts earlier. Investment returns. Differences in the type of assets owned can lead to different long-term returns. That's anybody. Educational and occupation. Educational attainment and occupational segregation affect lifetime earnings. Family structure and demographic factors, marriage rates, household size, and age distributions also influence wealth accumulation. What does the evidence suggest? Most economists conclude that historical differences in the ability to accumulate and transfer assets over generations explain more of today's wealth gap than differences in income alone. The plan from back then, it's chess move, 12 steps back. Even when comparing black and white households with similar incomes, substantial wealth differences often remain because wealth reflects many decades or even centuries of accumulated assets and inheritances. At the same time, there's an active debate about the relative importance of current factors such as education, labor markets, savings behavior, and public policy. Different researchers emphasize these factors to different degrees, but there is broad agreement, broad agreement that the racial wealth gap is the result of multiple interacting causes rather than a single variable. Chad said it.